Good morning. My name is Lisa DeMarco, and I'd like to welcome you to Understanding New York State Ed Law 2D to protect student data, manage liability, mitigate risk, and ensure compliance. Panelists, please introduce yourselves and the company and organization you represent. Feel free to briefly speak to the credentials that position you as an expert on today's topic.
Okay, so good morning everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. I usually can't project because I have 2 children and I also used to perform, so here we go. I'm Sherry Diamond, very happy to be here. I'm a partner at Cerini and Associates. We are a full-service accounting firm. We have 2 offices located in Bohemia and a new office in Syosset. We have 8 partners, 75 employees. We provide obviously accounting services, tax services, auditing, consulting and advisory services to a number of different industries. We're most known for the services that we provide to nonprofit organizations as well as the education sector, which includes public and private schools, and private education, private special education schools. My background really quick, as I started out as a programmer, believe it or not, at Avis, the world headquarters, which was on Old Country Road in Garden City. Anybody remember that? Yeah, okay. It's now, I think, a smash burger or something. You know, I actually went in there one day and it's like, oh, I think this is where I used to actually sit. So I was extracting information out of their mainframe system, so I'm dating myself, yes, COBOL, and they actually had a package that I was using called EasyTree, which was from their external auditors, Coopers and Lybrand, yes, back when there were 8. So Coopers and Lybrand caught wind of what I was doing and said, you need to work for us. Went into their New York City office in their external audit department. It was a new department, an IT external audit department. So there, I'm assisting in the audit because at that time you could still audit around the system. Anybody remember that phrase? Okay. So 4 years in the New York City office, 2 years in the DC office, missed Long Island, came back home to family, went to Grumman before the takeover of Northrop in their internal audit department. Got my master's after the takeover. Stopped working from there, got my master's in elementary education, was teaching for a small stint. Believe it or not, I was also PTA, council. I have a lot of experience. I was also piano accompanist for school districts, so I did a lot of things working in schools. Cerini and Associates comes along. It was the best way for me to marry kind of all my worlds together, working with predominantly public school districts across the island, doing internal auditing, functions with that lens of understanding what happens in the classroom. And taking all that experience and just being able to give it to as many people as possible. So right now I'm responsible for overseeing the internal auditing and internal controls consulting services that we provide to mostly school districts. That's what I'm predominantly responsible for, as well as nonprofit organizations. Obviously that includes identifying risks and making recommendations to reduce those risks, compliance with laws and Law 2D being the topic right now, rules, regulations, and policies. Assessing the effectiveness and efficiencies of your operations, assessing internal controls over protection and reporting of financial data. And of course now data is all digitized, so you don't have the option of auditing around the system. We all feel the pain of some of the recent breaches that have happened. So for me, it was really important that we work with a team of experts who can help to understand those risks and communicate those risks to our clients and implement strategies, hence the panel.
Thank you, Sherry. Joseph Horowitz.
Hi everyone. Again, I have a projectable voice because I have a 15-year-old I yell at all the time. So I am Joe Horowitz. I'm the Director of Compliance and Audit for Stetson Cyber Group. We are a full-service cybersecurity consulting firm here on Long Island, located in Hauppauge. Our specialties are risk assessments, gap analysis, penetration testing, digital forensics. We work with school districts across Long Island, small businesses, mid-sized businesses. A little bit about myself. I started my career as a financial and operational auditor. Done a lot of work in government and healthcare. I am married to a teacher, so we have all of our friends are teachers, administrators. I hear the pains that everybody has on a daily basis, whether it be just a normal contract issue or if it's a cybersecurity issue that they have. Spent a lot of my early career in financial and operational audit, doing that type of work, and then transitioned into IT and information systems auditing. Started doing a lot of work with compliance, whether it be HIPAA, high trust, PCI compliance, And over the last couple of years, been doing a lot of work now, especially with the school districts, doing New York State Ed Law 2D, working with businesses on the New York State regulations, NYCR 500, and all those type of regulations. So our main focus is looking at your risks and where are your gaps, right? A lot of school districts out there, you keep hearing them in the news, unfortunately. They're getting hit with cyber attacks. These attackers don't care what industry that you work in, what you're in. School districts have a lot of information, data and information, whether it be just the students, the parents, the teachers, the administration, the school board. They know it's a nice one-stop shop for them, and unfortunately, a lot of school districts are not prepared for this, and it's a shame. We make sure that we come in, we identify the areas that need to be tightened up, and we do work with everybody on this panel. It's a team effort, and I think that the best way that we find that things happen the right way in a lot of these school districts is when everybody's on board and understanding that it's everybody's issue. It's not just an IT issue, it's for the administrators to get involved, it's for teachers, it's the trainings. So that's what we do, and that's how we try to help school districts. We really come in and try to identify the areas where you need to be in compliance with Ed Law 2D. And just very quickly, Ed Law 2D Part 121 does require safeguarding PII, personal identifiable information, requires you to be in conformance with the NIST Cybersecurity framework. Make sure that you have a data security and privacy plan. Training for the staff is mandatory, and you must have something for your third-party contractors.
Thank you, Joe. Anthony Buenospina, Long Island Tech Advisors.
Hi, I'm Anthony. A little bit about myself. I'm an engineer. I have both 2 degrees in engineering and computer science. I went to Polytechnic, which is now NYU. It's now, Long Island's now Walmart. So, so I can relate with Sherry there. I have 4 kids, okay, and they all went for their ed degree, okay. My wife's a teacher, so of course I'm forced into the teaching aspect. I make sure, they correct me all the time when I'm speaking too fast, or, I need to be more patient with the teachers. Matter of fact, again, I yelled a lot at 2 of my kids, and especially my daughter, who's also in the audience here. So anyhow, but basically, I have a company that's about a little over 25 years old, Allied Tech Advisors. We're located in Babylon. I have a lot of smart guys working with me. We basically deal with the infrastructure of schools, all right, make sure they're in compliance. Monitoring, we do training, employee training, automated as well as in person as well as virtual training. We also do, custom software and compliances, including ADA and CAG, to make sure websites are in compliance with that. We also have, I have experts in, not like Joe here, but we do, lightly cybersecurity scans and so on. Also, a lot of monitoring, making sure we do 24/7. We have a SOC to make sure that your equipment stays into compliance. We also make sure your backups are in place. In the event of a catastrophe, it's not if, it's when it happens. So we got to make sure we have a plan in place for that. If you don't plan properly, you're just open to problems. So many schools, I'm into a lot of schools. They're soft targets, mainly because they don't have the infrastructure set up right. They don't have training in place. The employees, I think it's at 90% now, is where the problems come in. Breaches and so on, because of poorly trained employees. As far as additional services we offer and so on, is data protection, again 24/7 monitoring, as well as also compliance testing and so on.
Thank you, Anthony. David Faverio, Pupfish Sustainability Solutions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm the president of Pupfish Sustainability Solutions, and we do data destruction and electronics recycling. We're located right here in Hauppauge. Our goal for the schools is to make sure that all that personal private information is not getting out, and to stress the fact that recycling is not data destruction. We are a AAA NAID certified company. We were certified in data destruction, so we do it the right way from start to finish. Our employees and anybody who touches your data has been drug tested, background tested. The devices are transferred in our GPS tracked vehicles back to our secure facility, where they're locked up until the devices are completely wiped. You know, we handle all kinds of companies as well as schools, and I like to tell my marketing person that I care about the regulations, but I really don't, because when we destroy the data, it's gone forever, and that's when your liability ends. Protecting the devices is a marathon. I've kind of started talking about that, where we all work together from start to finish, and these people can carry you from the start to mile 26.1, but until that data is wiped, which is the last tenth of a mile, we bring you across that finish line, because when we bring you across that finish line, that data is completely wiped. We also do recycling. We have a zero landfill policy, so all the devices are either repurposed or recycled through an R2 certified recycler. So nothing winds up going overseas, nothing winds up in the landfill. It's all either repurposed or recycled back into the manufacturing stream. That helps with the schools in terms of tracking the amount of recycled equipment, because every time we do a pickup, we provide a detailed list of what we picked up, make, model, serial number, and a weight. If there's a data containing device, we provide the same information and what it came out of, so you have traceability back to the devices. So if you're audited, you can show them all this information. We provide certificates of data destruction and certificates of recycling, and we're here to help. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to talk afterwards.
Thank you, David. Rob Tokarczewski, USI Insurance Services.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Rob Tokarczewski, Vice President of Property and Casualty on the business side for USI Insurance. Very quickly about USI Insurance, we're one of the largest brokers nationwide. Being a broker means that we represent and work for the organizations that we represent in marketing the business to the various carriers that are out there. We run the gamut in terms of all the types of risk mitigating instruments, various policies, whether it's on the retirement, the employee benefit, property and casualty side. I'm on the property and casualty side, as I mentioned, and I specialize, my team and I, on emerging risks. Cyber, over the last several years, is one of the largest risks identified in both the public and private sector as having the biggest risk out there for whether it's CEOs, business owners, school superintendents, run the gamut in terms of organizations. Work on the emerging risk and really helping companies, and everyone's different industries are big on buzzwords, or in our case, cyber resiliency. You'll hear that several times mentioned up here. And basically, insurance is part of your cyber or your overall risk mitigation plan, but it's only one piece of it. As the gentleman up here had alluded to, they each have another piece to help in the overall protection or the overall safeguarding of data. From a school and a public entity perspective, you guys are a treasure trove of information. And what I have found is both large and small school districts as well as organizations always believe it's not going to be them. It's always going to be the next guy. I'm too small. Why does somebody want to, kind of attack our area? To I'm very large and we do invest millions of dollars in the infrastructure. What we find is that it is an area of both targeted risk as well as risk of opportunity. So we'll hear more about that, but basically, I'm on the insurance side, and we help mitigate a lot of what's out there through the policies that we issue.
Thank you, Rob. Dr. Mary O'Meara is here with us. She's Superintendent of Plainview Old Bethpage Central School District.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for this opportunity. I am the Superintendent of Plainview Old Bethpage School District, located in the middle of Nassau County, with about 52, not a big man like you guys, 5,200 students, a little under 1,400 employees, and every one of them are responsible for all of the data. I appreciate what Joe said. We are a district that has data on students' behavior, their academics, their special ed testing. We have all of their families' data, and we have all of our employee data. And what has been very difficult coming out of the pandemic, and everybody is in one-to-one, everybody had an opportunity to do some kind of trial of some kind of tech tool where student data was transferred to, really made us realize in our district how vulnerable we were. I appreciate Joe saying it's not never, it's when, and that has me already thinking about how do you start preparing the public to understand we may be a subject of an attack. I understand that as individual districts have cyber attacks, those criminals get smarter at what we have and how to get at them, making it more difficult for us to come up with comprehensive plans to protect our data. But like Rob said here, really like training all of the people that touch our data has been critical to us. We were very fortunate to hire an exceptional tech director and to have a central office at Board of Ed that really supports this work. It is ongoing work, it is everyday work, and I have to tell you, the minute you take your eye off that work is when you've left your data unattended. So, and that's not our primary purpose. Our primary purpose is to educate the 5,200 students, but you have to find time and finances to support this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O'Meara. Matthew Maynard is a partner at Guercio & Guercio.
Good morning, everybody. All right, so I'm hoping that I'm loud enough that everybody can hear me, because if I start talking into the mic, I'm probably going to be drowning your eardrums. For those of you that know me, I'm relatively new at Guercio & Guercio, which is a law firm that represents a lot of school districts on Long Island. I've only been at the firm for about a month. Before that, I spent 13 years at Lamb & Barnosky, which is another firm that represents some school districts here on Long Island. Before that, I was in-house counsel for Stephen Barry's, which some people may remember is a national retail company. I represent school districts largely in labor and employment matters. I'm also a litigator. As I've mentioned to several of the panelists as I've gotten to know them, I'm usually the bearer of bad news. No one really likes to talk to a lawyer, right? But you gotta have a lawyer on a panel like this because we're talking about the law, right? But your lawyers in this regard can be your best friends. Why? Because we're gonna help you walk through the entire process. There's multiple individuals here who've talked about particular pieces of what they do from the beginning to the end. But you need somebody to work with you to walk through from point A to point C. And that's what your lawyers can help you do. That doesn't mean I by no means have any technical prowess as some of the other individuals on this panel, but I have been sort of steeped in 2D for a long time. Over the last 4 to 5 years, I would say that other than my active litigation, the single biggest thing I have worked on has been education to 2D compliance, both with school districts and within my own office. Before I got to Guercio & Guercio, I was one of the heads of my firm's technology committee. Law firms, this applies to them too. And that I think took people by surprise. They didn't realize, well, what do you mean this applies to us? How does it not apply, right? So I've spent a lot of my time dealing with technology, the ever-changing environment. You'll hear, for those of you who know what the NIST cybersecurity framework is, and have actually looked at the documentation and read some of it, you can probably explore it the first time. Mine did too, but I've spent a lot of time going through that. It's an ever-changing environment, and that's because the framework is always changing. Why? Because the threats are always changing. Something changes in technology and we become better at security. The people who are trying to break in become better at how to break that. And it's you always have to be vigilant. As much as that takes up time, it takes up money, it takes up resources. But as Dr. O'Meara said, the second you turn your head away from it for a minute is the second you make it easier for someone to get in. And that has been something I have been focused on for several years. And with my old firm and now with my new firm, which is why I'm here today. But hopefully, if people have questions, and I'm sure some of you I will get to know because I know some of you are clients of my firm, and as we go, I'm sure I will get to know some of you a little bit more. But I'm always happy to answer questions, as I'm sure the other panelists are as well.
Thank you, Matt. So New York State Education Law 2D applies to school districts, charter schools, universal pre-K providers, and BOCES. It also applies to special education schools that have contracted with the New York State Education Department or local school districts. Educational institutions in New York State are tasked with ensuring their technologies, safeguards, and practices align with the National Institute for Standards and Technology framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity, or NIST, and that all third-party vendor contracts comply with this multifaceted data privacy law. Panelists, please discuss how you collaborate with one another to protect K12 data and support schools in achieving New York State Ed Law 2D compliance.
So from my perspective as an auditor, an internal auditor with school districts, it starts by having a dialogue with the IT directors. Every year, we're always assessing risk. Actually, we're assessing risk constantly throughout the year, but we have to memorialize it at some point in the year. That's required by New York State law and Ed law. So what we're doing is we're having a conversation with our IT directors to understand what the risks are out there. Do they understand? And we're actually changing the conversation lately. We really want them to be honest with us. It's don't just answer your auditor yes anymore. You know, tell us, do you really have sufficient resources to combat the threats that are out there? Ed Law 2D has a lot of requirements, and you have to be able to have the resources to be able to implement them, not just money and programs, but you need people. And that seems to be something that schools have fallen behind on. So in our conversations with Ed Law 2D, you know, we're really trying to get at, are you complying it? How are you complying it? How are you getting the vendors to sign those agreements? Are you making sure they're not redlining anything and then, you know, just agreeing to something that is not really in agreement with Ed Law 2D? Do you understand NIST, and what training do you have, and what training do you need to have? So this is where, you know, we're your advocate. When I started doing this back in the 80s for big companies, I mean, they used to like look at me, the IT auditor, I was like, oh, Christmas came early, you know, like I'd be advocating things for the department to make management and the board aware of what is needed. So my conversation now is that you're gonna need to spend more money going forward. I mean, you're talking about one-to-one devices now because of the remote learning. You're talking about just all the security protocols that you have to protect and defend against. You know, it's going to take money, and it's a conversation that we can have with your board. And then from there, we can make recommendations for you to get other resources put in. We're not capable of doing that deep IT audit, that network audit. We would defer that to other people to do the vulnerability assessments to make sure that you're getting that done, the ethical hacks, pen tests, whatever.
Thank you, Sherry. Joe, same question, please.
Sure. I think it's important to understand the definition of cybersecurity before we go forward. You know, cybersecurity is not, hey, my IT department's going to protect me. Cybersecurity is protecting the data and information within, having a program to protect your data and information. All right, and that means everybody. So what we would do is we would come in and actually do a risk assessment on the school districts, which is really required to come in and see where are your gaps as far as against the NIST cybersecurity framework, because that is required by Ed Law 2D. Once we identify those gaps, we can either recommend strengthening the current systems that you have in place from a technology perspective, or identifying maybe ways that you need to improve or get new systems. But we tend to like to tell you if you have something in place already to use what you have. We're also going to help you identify if there's certain controls, especially, and I think I need to go back a little bit, policies. Policies are very important for every school district to have, and I know you don't like to call it policies because you don't want to go to the board, so just call them documented procedures. You don't have to go through the whole approval process through the board. I get it, I totally get it. But the reason you have these documented procedures is because you need to have a repeatable program in place to protect your systems and your school district from your data and your information year after year after year. And what happens if, say, and this happens, you play the Powerball for $1.5 billion and all the people who are doing these controls are gone tomorrow, how do you know what to do? How do you know what you have in your school district now? You're starting from scratch again. So it's important to have those policies and procedures in place, do the risk assessment, identify your gaps and your needs that you have to put in place, and please make sure that we help you with the training. Even if we have to come in and do training for you, we'll do it in person, because I know a lot of these automated ones are just brutal to get through. I totally get that as well. We do work with the third-party contractors. I was speaking with someone earlier. You don't know that they're getting into your systems. A lot of times they'll just latch into your systems without you even knowing about it. They just take liberties because they figured, oh, we can just do whatever we want to do and go and get into your systems. That's not acceptable. So there's a lot of different things will come in, and we'll identify those things for you and let you know where your problems areas are. If we have to do a penetration test or a vulnerability assessment, we'll come in and do that as well, which will really look into your systems a little bit deeper to see where those vulnerabilities are.
Thank you, Joe. Anthony, before you answer that same question, you work primarily with private and charter schools. How does EdLaw 2D apply to them?
Well, it basically applies in the sense of every school should have processes and procedures, documented procedures in place, because it just makes common sense. I mean, you need to have processes and procedures in place to protect the data you have. Too many times I go into a school, they don't have, the infrastructure is not set up properly, they have no plan for it. I go in immediately, we create we look at, evaluate everything, create a 3-year plan right off the bat to say, look, this is what you have now, this is what you need, this is the path forward. So there's no surprises with the expenses and so on. Because you're going to need a high-end business class, enterprise level router. You're going to need training for your employees. You're going to need certain things in place. It's not just about IT too. Everybody thinks IT is like the F-O end-all. I mean, what we do is important, but without these guys to my left and right, it's a holistic approach. So you need to be able to, take this and, run with it. Basically, again, what we do is go in and make sure that third parties accessing your system, because we lock everything down. And if there's a third party coming in, or we even say, like, what does this person need? It's an HVAC system downstairs in the basement that's running Windows XP. I mean, come on, guys. So we look at that Bell system, all right, that's running Windows 7 still out of compliance. We'll look at the whole thing. And we take Joe's information, what he will feed back to us, and say, look, these are weaknesses here, guys, you got to beef it up. Then we'll work on a 3-year plan to say, okay, look, this is what we can do now. Here's the money you have. This is what you're going to need going forward. Okay, and so basically that's it. It's just working synergistically with these guys. It's a holistic approach.
Thank you very much. David, same question.
So, as everybody's mentioned, we do work very well together, and hopefully we're brought in early on in the system. So if Cerini Associates is in there and they see the need for data destruction, hopefully they bring us in at that point. Or if Joe's doing a plan, he'll bring us in. Or if Anthony's replacing some devices, they'll bring us in. I know Rob will often try and do some insurance, some cyber insurance for schools, and they can't answer all the questions on the questionnaire, which makes it either difficult to get the insurance or very expensive to get the insurance. And by putting that plan in place, including the end-of-life disposition of the assets, he can often go back to the insurance companies and hopefully negotiate on their behalf. And obviously we help the school districts get rid of the devices, and hopefully we don't have to get involved with the lawyers at the end. But if we do, we have the certifications, we have the reports, so at least the schools can go to whoever they have to answer to and say, listen, we have the documentation, we destroyed the devices as best as we could, and it was done the right way. So let's not look in this direction, we have to find where this breach happened elsewhere. A lot of people up on the panel talked about documented procedures, and now schools have to have them. And I think that's one thing that differentiates Pupfish a little bit, is that being AAA NATE certified, we have those procedures in place. Part of our audit was the auditor came in and looked at our processes and our procedures to make sure that we had everything covered from start to finish, and it was all documented and everybody was trained properly on that. For us, it's very, very important. I like to point to this one thing where if we suspect the device has data, we put it in our data room and it gets locked up until we can confirm it does not have data. And we did have a case where somebody told us that it was a straight recycle job, no data, but we followed the procedure, and the next day when we looked at those devices, there was a hard drive sitting, in one of the devices. So it could have been left out in the warehouse, just to be recycled, but it was handled according to our processes and our procedures. So we understand what the schools need to go through, and we make sure that we continue what you should be doing when we take possession of those devices.
Thank you, David. Rob, same question, please.
So hopefully everyone can hear me. This is the first where I was told that people couldn't hear me in the back when I was speaking, so I can't wait to go home and tell my wife and kids that, because they think I'm very loud. So, I mentioned the term cyber resiliency before, and I think it's very important to kind of note that and kind of talk a little bit about it, because I think it really is something that you're going to be hearing more of, and if you're not, you should be. From a cyber resiliency standpoint, really it just basically means is how resilient, how quickly can you respond in a cyber event, and how do you do that and be able to then be up and running and have very limited interruption. So when you look at the cyber resiliency, there's three pieces of it. The first is identifying the risks. So there are professionals up here on the panel, as well as out in the community, that can help that happen. Too many times, a lot of, whether it's both public and private entities, maybe don't want to know the risks, because once they know the risks, they have to address them. But I'm telling you, you need to identify first and foremost where you're the most vulnerable from a cyber perspective. And there's people that can help you with that. The second piece of that is, once you know where those risk vulnerabilities are, is what is out there that's going to help you control those risks. Because I think it's been mentioned up here a couple of times, is the bad actors just keep learning as they go along. So you could be investing, and probably are investing, a lot of money in various both hardware and software pieces out there to help safeguard your data. You could be investing in training for administrators and for teachers and for others. But you also have a lot more access points and situations that have arisen, especially over the last couple of years, such as students now being sent home with tablets. There's even the smart boards attaching to your systems. There's so many more vulnerabilities that you don't really think about and really how to control that. And that technology is a wonderful thing when it comes to being able to, for the advancement of mankind. It's also, there's threats to that, because there's, for every good person out there, unfortunately there's a bad one that's there that's going to want to take and exploit that. So the second piece of that is the risk control piece of it. And again, there's people up here that I've worked with that I know very well and have done a great job in helping to now look to control that on an ongoing basis. And then the last piece of it is really the risk transfer. So from a cyber resilience, and that's where somebody like myself would come into play. Because again, once you've now identified the risks, you've now started to address them with various hardware and software situations. Now, how much of that risk do you want to hold on to, and how much of that would you want to transfer to a third party, in this case the insurance sector? And I think that that's really important, that overall cyber resiliency piece, and kind of how we all work together, because we're all part of being able to help keep your organization up and running in the face of any threats that may be out there.
Thank you, Rob. Dr. O'Meara, why is data protection mission critical to you as a superintendent, and what practices, procedures, and policies have you implemented within your district to ensure New York State Ed Law 2D and Part 121 compliance?
That's a great question, and really the consequences are so great if you don't address it, and for individuals and for the organization. And there are short-term consequences when there's an attack, and there are the long-term effects. The largest long-term effect is the lack of trust the community has in you to keep their data safe. And the challenge is we can't become a closed system, because technology is what we use to do our work. I liken our work with cybersecurity to what we did with regular security. You know, in light of all the school shootings, if you think about how different districts implemented security measures to keep their buildings safe and their students and staff safe without building an iron wall around the buildings. And we involved everybody on this panel just in a different lens. So we involved Homeland Security to do audits of our buildings to see where our various access points were and our weaknesses. we engaged insurance companies to cover us for the certain risks that are related to that. I think one of the greatest things we've done is bring in an outside agent to do a cybersecurity audit. And that has provided us with immediate steps we can take, prioritize where our greatest vulnerability is, while we work on a multi-year strategic plan to address the major infrastructures and trainings that must go on and continue in order to keep our data safe. One of you said up front about, if you don't want to involve your board, it was Shari. I would argue against that. I would absolutely demand the board address this and get policy on the books, because that's the one thing that we as superintendents can use to say, this is in your policy. So when there are competing interests of where to spend money and what to focus on, you can always say, but you have this policy that says you will do to this degree of work to secure the cyber system of the school district. We work with our attorneys to make sure that we are in full compliance with the law and then don't overstep. But I really think bringing an outsider in, we have an excellent tech director, and the problem with education is we don't attract the best of the best in this industry because we really are, we're capped at what we can spend on that. When you think about the folks who are coming out of the major institutions of higher ed with degrees for cybersecurity, the private sector is commanding a much higher salary than what we could offer. So you can't just rely on your internal tech. You really must bring in outside experts to do this work. And the ongoing training of staff. But I have to tell you, it's the long-term and short-term disruptions to the system that make this mission critical. I mean, just think of a high school guidance department that gets hacked in September. No student can apply for college because all of their data, their transcripts, their Navions, all their information lives in that system, and if it gets shut down, or worse, imagine that you are actually having an intruder in your building and your communication system gets shut down. How do you communicate? So very similar to the steps districts have taken for their safety of their students, physical safety, which includes drills. I think districts have to start considering beyond phishing campaigns, what do you do when we shut down the communication system? And we address that in Plainview Bethpage. We have our administrators on WhatsApp, and we only use it for that situation. When we realize there may be a breach to our email system, we have a way to communicate with each other that's outside of our internal communication system, and that's less likely to get hacked. But many of you probably realize the different ways you've communicated, particularly when we were in shutdown. There were texts, there were Google Meets, there were Zoom calls, there were email exchanges, and those of you who use the WebEx. But WhatsApp kept us in touch when we needed to get offline completely, and it allows us to immediately send a message to all of our key stakeholders that stop using the computers, shut everything down, get an announcement out there to tell your teachers to stop working on their computers.
Thank you, Dr. O'Meara. Panelists, Dr. O'Meara mentioned policy and board involvement, and this starts with educating the decision makers within the district. How do you educate districts, whether on cybersecurity, data destruction, or the need for assessments in general?
Well, that goes back to the mission of the internal audit, which is really the role of identifying those risks that are out there and communicating those risks to management and the board of the district. So our role is through a report of recommendations. We're not there to slap people on the wrist saying bad, but you have to understand what the risks are and what general good practices are, best practices. What's interesting about internal audit is that we have a really interesting lens of like an operation. So for a school district, we're looking at the data interdependency, the data flow. So we're looking to see who the data owners are and who is, being responsible for that information. So again, you're talking to different types of people, from special ed, from transportation, food services, extra classroom, all the areas that we're talking about that are involved in any kind of business operations. There's always business office, payroll, accounts payable, accounts receivable, benefits, HR. Those are all the main components you just layer on top for the specific industry that you're in. And you're there to communicate via recommendations, by meeting with the boards. Hopefully you do get to meet with them, and the audit committees, and making sure that there is a technology committee. trying to assess whether, they have the mechanisms in place and making those recommendations to improve their security posture internally. So that's working with a whole team of people. A lot of people work with BOCES, and it's great because they actually provide other resources for school districts. For example, in Ed Law 2D, which has been around, since 2014?
2014.
I mean, this is nothing new. It's just that it's just gotten a lot of press, to kind of implement it. But, as far as vetting those, third-party agreements, BOCES has stepped up to the plate saying, we're gonna do that for you. See, that takes some of the pressure off the districts, to be able to, address and implement the security controls that they need to in place. So it's a whole approach. It's not just one thing. We have to do with the recommendations. Dr. Mir is right. We sit in front of a board, we make these recommendations. If they're not gonna take them, then they're accepting the risk at that point.
Thank you, Sherry. Joe, same question, please.
Sure. So I think it's easier to educate and to really, for everyone to understand when they realize the ramifications of not being compliant with about 2D, number one. And number two, really the risk involved. Like we talked about, if your school district gets hacked, do you really want to be in Newsday? Do you want the parents running up to the school board? Do you want them running up? I don't like seeing the parents in any district running up and screaming at teachers or administrators. It's not fun. I've seen it. I think it's easier. The IT folks, some of them in the room that we've worked with, and I applaud you. You work really hard. You get it, but it's really educating everybody else within the district and making them understand it's their issue as well. And I think we try to do that really well when we go in and we do our trainings. We make them understand it's not just protecting the data within and information in your school district. It's protecting your data information at home. I mean, if you don't have if you're not going to protect your data information at home or at work, what's to say that vice versa, you're going to lose your data in either place? Well, it doesn't take that much to really implement stuff like multi-factor authentication, or to or to strengthen your password, or to not leave your password underneath your keyboard, right? These are easy things to do for anybody in the district and for anybody to educate. And again, we come in and we talk to teachers, we talk to administrators, we talk to the transportation department, the facilities department, and we really make them understand what their piece is in the greater scheme of things. And I really do always go back to, do you want a parent yelling at you? Does anybody in this room want any parent yelling at them for anything? I don't think so. So really understanding why we do this on top of the compliance piece and to make your lives a little bit easier. Your day-to-day is to educate the children in your district. It's not to always worry about this stuff. But unfortunately, this is something that has to be addressed, and there's little things that everybody can do to really pitch in.
Thank you. Anthony, again, you work primarily with private and charter. Do they realize that this law and Part 121 applies to them? And if not, how do you educate those
Most of them don't think
organizations?
it applies. I agree. But basically what we do is we actually go in, sit down with the board, sit down with the heads of schools, and go through, and we actually, some cases, some of the schools I went to, the tech committee, I created it for them. I said, look, this is what I need, this is the people I need involved, and we got together and then we planned out, what needs to be done. It's very important, training is paramount. Getting the buy-in from not just the principals and the teachers and so on to understand why this is so important. Because like Joe said, you don't want a parent coming to school yelling because something happened which could have been avoided. And even if it couldn't be avoided, because again, it's like, you're going to get hacked. It's going to happen, okay? Even with the highest walls, the deepest moats, throw water in there, throw alligators in, we're still going to get hacked, okay? It's a matter of having...
Let's collectively not would.
We hope not.
No, but the thing is, you have to assume you will, and you have to have the process and procedures in place to protect what happens after, okay? Again, so going with the premise of like, you're going to be hacked, now what do we need to do so you don't get hacked, okay? Because if you look at the ramifications, that's what I go in with a district. I do training, I scale it however everybody, and then I give them a process to go through. Okay, like, this is what could happen, this is what may happen, but this is how we're going to prevent it. Okay, this is the steps you need to take. Here's the budget to do it. We go through the whole thing, lay it right out, and it's going to be like, this is what you need now, this is what you need in the next year, and next 2 years, and 3 years. Put this in place. So it's very important to, plan and so on. Again, what we do is make sure that, number one, process and procedures are in place, make sure that the technology is there, that you have the right hardware and so on, the infrastructure is up to par, you have training in place, multi-factor in place. Like Joe said too, we do the same thing, is that basically not just train the teachers and stuff, but also teach them what they need to do at home. Because if their home life gets hacked, it messes up the business life too. It's conduits of getting back into and screw up the school, basically. So it's a holistic approach, and again, the idea here is to make sure you have protections in place, but also in the event that you do get hacked, a process immediately what you need to do. What's the first thing you're going to do when you realize that it's a hack? What's the first phone call you make?
And who's the first phone call? To your attorney.
It's gotta be an attorney. You always call your attorney first. Okay?
All right.
Believe it or not.
Thank you, Anthony.
Always the bad news with the
And Matthew will explain why that's important. David, you touched on something earlier. Pupfish is an IT asset disposition firm, and you did mention that recycling is not data destruction. Yet those school board minutes, which are very public, sometimes indicate that missed step. How do you educate on this?
Yeah, so it's a little different for Pupfish because these other people on the panel generally develop relationships with the people in the business office. Where Pupfish usually comes in, we want to get in quick, get the devices, take care of it, provide the reports, and then be ready for the next job, right? So we educate through panels like this. We go to trade shows. We try to put stuff on social media just to talk about the fact that what we do, how we do it, and that the service is out there. A lot of the times when we speak to schools, it's not to get the IT directors to know we're here and what needs to be done because they know. We like to talk to the business people because we don't look at the data as an IT issue, we look at it as a risk management issue. It's that way for the schools, and it's that way for the companies we deal with also. It's not the IT directors at the businesses, it's the CFOs typically. They're going to say, okay, this is a risk, how do we manage it? Sorry, Lisa, where do you want me to go with this?
No, that's okay. I was just asking you how you go about educating, and do schools reach out to you to help write that data disposition policy?
So they typically won't have us write the data disposition policy. That will typically be a company like Stetson that will do that, and they may provide Pupfish as a company to do that job for them as a recommendation. The IT people understand what needs to be done. They may not know how to do it. And they may not understand that having an independent company come in and do the job and certify it, since we are certified, that's extremely important also. And honestly, the IT directors are extremely busy. They don't have time to wipe devices all day, right? You're busy trying to keep the school running and the devices running. We did a pickup at a company, and the guy was so proud that he had wiped all the devices before I came and did the pickup. And he told me how it took him 1.5 years to do all the devices. And I told him, that's great, it's going to take me a day because I have to wipe it anyway. And we have the capability to wipe multiple devices. So again, that frees up those assets and those resources that you have at the schools to do the job and not just worry about the data destruction. So that's really how we help.
And I would assume that in that 1.5 years, those assets lost value.
They sure do. They sure do. The longer the assets sit, the more value they lose.
Sure. Okay.
And the more risk there is. We call it data at rest. And data at rest is data at risk. If it's sitting there, there can be a breach, a disgruntled employee, a supplier in the building, somebody makes a mistake, just leaves the door open and those assets are available to disappear, and then it becomes a breach. So it's better to get rid of the devices as quickly as possible.
And just to add to that, we've seen a lot of school districts where they have the devices in rooms that are shared with PTA or other folks throughout the district. So you're leaving those devices unwiped and available to anybody that enters those rooms. So something to think about.
Dr. O'Meara, where do you believe the data protection responsibility lays, and who is ultimately accountable for ensuring ensuring students' personal data is secure not only while in use, but after electronics and servers become obsolete.
Well, just because the superintendent winds up on the cover of Newsday doesn't mean it's just with the superintendent. I have to tell you, it's every single person who has access to the data or devices in the district. You have teachers that may work on a Chromebook in school and then go home and do more work on their personal computers, and that data could be transferred there. It is our Board of Education. They have a lot of sensitive data, even though everything is online with board docs, if that's the management system you use, but they could compromise that with or where they do their board work in preparation for board meetings. It's our students and training them about where they share their passwords, what sites they go to. Now we have in our district GoGuardian, so we can kind of watch what they're doing. And usually those who are going to places they shouldn't go are at-risk students. So they're the ones that leave us most vulnerable. But to your point about seeing where people leave their extra devices, I think that's a tell. Like if you're new to a district and you're trying to quickly get the lay of the land, look to where the Chromebooks or the iPads are stored. And you'll usually find them in a back room of a library or in a closet somewhere that you have very easy access to. And it's incredible the amount of things. People will leave their cell phones out. People will sit too closely to one another and log on. And people have become ready and willing to accept that their personal data would be compromised. I was recently in a meeting with principals and one of them said, I have to leave early today. Chase just called, someone moved $15,000 out of our bank account. And she said it with such ease. And it turned out her husband had gotten online at a Starbucks and gotten his information, and they opened up another account under his name, and they were transferring it out of their account into this husband's new account. But I couldn't believe the calm with which she said it, which made me very nervous that as people become willing to accept this as part of our lives, they will become complacent. But keeping it front and center in your discussions, making sure you have regular board reports on the state of your technology, which includes cybersecurity and your inventory, and then making sure you have the budgetary means to support whatever may happen with your insurers if there is an attack, and and just to let you know, we do have a destruction plan, not a repurposing plan. So thanks for bringing that up.
Matt, same question?
So there's a lot here.
That's a loaded question.
There's a lot here, and as people have been talking, so one of the questions is, well, we've got these lawyers, and what do the lawyers do? How are they involved, right? The most important thing that I think your lawyers do for you in this process is education, which is the upfront part of this. Right? Everybody in this room is part of an education process. We're all educators at some level, right? Your lawyers are going to explain to you, hopefully, if they haven't already, and if they're in my firm, I hope they have. Explain to you what the statute and what these regulations require. I could spend 6 hours talking to you about what these regulations require, and I would bore you to death. The easiest way to do that is to scare the crap out of you and tell you what happens if you don't do what's required, right? Because that's what everybody hears, because that's, oh my God, right? Suffolk County, right? How many school districts in Suffolk County here? A couple? Okay. How many of you had to deal with the folks at the county over the last 4 or 5 months? Right. I got a number of things going on with them at any one time. Right? It is impossible to get anything done. I am now dealing with people, and was dealing with people, through their personal emails. My work email's not working. Here's this email address you should be communicating with me through. That's not a great idea. Right now, I am sure that they took some steps to secure it, but that's the worst case scenario. They're in a complete shutdown. I mean, they're at a standstill. That's what happens when we don't understand what we're supposed to do and work towards doing it. So the first thing the lawyers do for you, right, is come in and talk to you about that. Right? We're going to scare you because, as has been said, the worst case scenario. My attitude about things like this is plan for the worst and hope for the best, right? We always want to be prepared for the worst case scenario, which is why oftentimes your lawyers or others may be talking to you in these sort of doomsday scenarios. But that's because this is what can happen. And sadly, for many, that's what will happen at some point, right? But then there's other pieces to it. I've written down a number of things. Risk assessment. You need to understand what the risks are. Asset and resource management. It's a critical piece. You have to allocate the proper resources, and I don't just mean money. It's not just money. It's a big part of it. People, time, technology resources. These are all things that you have to allocate to dealing with the compliance. I can't explain enough just how important it is to make sure that you're budgeting properly. It's such a critical piece that both school districts, but not just the school districts, that deal with these sorts of things in the private sector a lot too. They don't adequately spend or account for how much they're going to have to spend. You have to replace an entire software program system. Think about how much time it's going to take to do it. Think about how much money it's going to cost to make the change. Then think about how much time you have to spend training everybody to do it. You don't just have to train everyone on it, you're going to have to deal with the constant question, the constant dissatisfaction with whatever change you just made, and hand-holding people through that process. You have people who won't understand the technology. You have people who won't want to use it. You'll have people who don't trust it. People with, I have a better idea, even though they have no idea, right? That's all an investment of time and resources, not money, time, right? Your IT directors, by and large, don't have the time to deal with all of that. You have to give them the proper personnel and assistance to be able to do that. And it is every day. Every day you will walk into your office and there will be something technology related, and that's just the way that it is now. And the more technology you introduce, the more these questions come up, the more time, the more investment. Your boards need to understand that. So that's in part your lawyers and the third-party vendors that are up here, right? They'll help you with that. But it's really about educating everybody about just how important these things are. Policies and procedures, really important. I agree with Dr. O'Meara. You really do need, the board needs to understand just how important this is. Policies make them understand. It forces them to confront it whether they want to or not. And unfortunately, this is not something that you can turn a blind eye to. You turn a blind eye and you're going to wind up on the front page of the paper, or you're going to wind up with angry parents, which is the last thing you want to do. The last thing you want is parents being angry about something like this. I want parents, I mean, I'm a parent, right? I want to be focused on the education of my kids, not some technology thing that happened and now my child's information's out there. That's the last thing I want to be concerned about. Your vendors, right? We're lawyers, right? We negotiate contracts, right? So your vendors, we're going to work with your vendors to make sure that they have all the appropriate contractual obligations and make sure that they're complying with those things. We're going to work with the school districts to make sure you're compliant. Not just, you'll get an assessment report and your lawyer's going to see it, and then we're going to go through it. And we're going to talk to you about, okay, well, here's what you need to do in order to be in compliance with the law, but we're also going to talk to you about some of the practicalities as well. Right? This is not just, well, it's a law and you have to comply and that's it. It doesn't work that way. The law doesn't work that way. We all know that. Right? The law requires you to do something, you're supposed to do it, but it's not always that simple, and in this area, it's really not that simple. So that's, there's lots of ways in which my firm, people like myself, become involved, but there's a lot here that's on you, and that stinks. It's just another thing for all of you to do. We get, but that's the sort of lay of the land. Everybody's got to be involved, from the smallest involvement in the technology system to the superintendent and to the board. Everyone has to be part of it, because if they're not, then you're just asking for trouble.
Thank you, Matt. Dr. O'Meara, did you have something to add?
I do. I can't overemphasize this about the use of vendors. A lot of school districts use BOCES, and they assume BOCES makes sure that everybody's law compliant. However, you really should challenge where your data is going. We do rely on third parties to, manipulate our data, house data, give us reports on data, your student management system, a lot of the testings like NWA, iReady, things like that, and Naviance, and to check in with them directly as opposed to hoping BOCES has done their due diligence. To really question that they are keeping up to date on some of the newer malwares and things like that we're seeing. But it's a real vulnerability, and speaking to other districts, and when you ask who else is responsible, I really do believe New York State should be more responsible, because it's highly unfair that 56 individual Nassau County districts have to figure this out in isolation and figure out how the taxpayer pays for it in your neighborhood. But if your neighborhood can't afford it, your kids are more at risk and your data's more at risk. New York State really should be taking a more comprehensive approach to providing the resources that individual districts need with the amount of data that we have.
Is there any way, that was gonna be one of my questions.
Okay, I'm just gonna ask you to hold off on that just for a few moments. Rob, did you have something to add to that?
I want to take just a half step back real quick before going forward, is that, so we just came out of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Does anyone here, including my panel members, know how many years we've now had Cybersecurity Month awareness out there? Anybody? 19. This is the 19th year. So there's a reason why 19 years they've been doing Cybersecurity Awareness Month, because the bad guys, the bad actors have had 20 years of head start on you in terms of creating opportunities to exploit vulnerabilities. Fast forward to where we are now. We have a room full of administrators and superintendents talking about 2D as one of the focuses. There's a reason why this law has been in effect since 2014, but now 2022, 8 years later, there's a greater focus on it. There's a greater focus on it because one of the trends that you're going to start to see is that from a regulatory perspective, both from a state as well as from a federal perspective, is that now government is stepping in to say, we need to have better controls, we need to have better understanding, we need to have better enforcement of things that are already on the books. So you'll hear more about 2D, you'll hear more businesses hear about the Critical Infrastructure Act of 2022, protecting the critical infrastructure this year went into effect from a national perspective. It's because now there is a greater emphasis from a regulatory perspective as well. And I think it's important to know that, because now it's not a matter of I didn't know, it's a matter of, well, you should have known. And from a regulatory perspective, that's what's happening. On the insurance perspective, carriers who have been paying out tremendous amounts of money, not only from a ransomware perspective, but from business interruption, from forensics, all the things that go into a cyber policy, they've been very cost effective for a lot of folks. Now, the carriers are stepping in and saying, in order for me to renew you, even though you may not have had any kind of breaches, but similarly situated other school districts have had situations, we're seeing on average rate increases of at least 75% for cyber alone. And there's, again, a reason behind that, because they want to get a better handle on things. And as part of that, they're also saying is, we're not even going to look to insure a school district unless we're comfortable that they have the right procedures and protocols and systems in place and are actively using those and can demonstrate that moving forward. So I think that that piece that really needs to come out is that there's a reason why 2D, for instance, has been in effect since 2014, but only now, 8 years later, do we have a room full of administrators and folks talking about it, because there's more regulatory push, and that's going to be more and more moving forward.
Jeff?
Just a quick thing, just to answer your question while I remember this. As a former government auditor myself, this is the response New York State has currently. They will send auditors out to you, and they will embarrass you in the press with bad audit reports. They currently don't have a mechanism in place to really fund a lot of these things, so I understand the frustrations. But it's unfortunate, and we're hoping that there is something in the future that they give a little bit more funding for this. They do sometimes offer some grants. They do offer grants, which we will promote, but a lot of times it's just not getting into the right hands.
Matt, question for you. It was brought up earlier that your call to your attorney should be your first phone call in the event of a cyber breach. Can you explain to our audience why that is?
Well, I would hope some of that is self-explanatory, but you're going to call your lawyer first because the lawyer is going to help you coordinate with everybody else. Okay? Your lawyer is your link to everyone else. Because your priority is going to be students in your districts, parents in your districts. Your lawyer's priority is going to be everybody else, right? You're going to call me, and I'm going to say, okay, you had a breach. One, then start thinking about, do we need to call the cops, right? Police department, because depending on what the nature of your breach is, we've got a problem there. Who's your IT people? Who are your outside vendors? We'll start talking to them immediately, right? While your focus needs to be on students. What happened to whatever problem, whatever happened, coordinate with families, coordinate with affected students, because they're really the ones who are most affected by whatever has just happened. But you want to get us involved because we need to help you guide through the process to, one, also make sure you're doing everything right. The law is not always intuitive. Sometimes it's counterintuitive, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing the things you need to do, and lawyers will help you do that while you're dealing with 6 million other things, because the breach is not the only thing on your agenda for the day. I'm sure many of you have lists that go on for pages of all the things you need to achieve in the day, and this just hijacked that, didn't it? Right? So your lawyers are going to help you coordinate with everybody else who needs to be involved, including, by the way, reporting, because you have obligations to report breaches. We're going to help you through that process as well.
And Matt, what does that do in the event of a litigation? Does it encapsulate that conversation?
In terms of, so if you wind up in a litigation, one of the things you should be mindful of is your response. So everything you do, one of the things that hasn't been said yet is I always have a mind on, yes, what happens if there's a lawsuit? Because that's what I do. The less compliant you are, the less seriously you take these, the worse it becomes for you. The more proactive you become, the more you involve the lawyer immediately. How many times have I gotten phone calls, not just about cybersecurity issues, but other issues, and they waited way too long to get the lawyer involved. And now it has gone from something that was a simple, solvable problem to out of control. I'm sure all of you have seen those situations before. I love them because they keep me busy in court in front of judges, having to explain why we didn't become proactive on something. It's the worst thing to do. I hope most of you never have to be in front of a judge explaining these things, but when I get asked, counsel, why didn't you just do X? Anybody would have thought to do that. Well, it's not that simple, Judge. And then you go into your explanation, and the judge kind of looks at you, gives you the side look, maybe shakes the head, right? That's the last place you want to be. The more reactive you become to these problems instead of out in front and proactive, the harder it gets, the worse the lawsuit outcome is going to be. Parent sues you and says you didn't do enough to adequately safeguard my child's information. I have to be able to say, yes, we did. We did everything we could have done. This was an unforeseeable incident because it's some new cyber attack. If I can't answer the simple question of did you do everything you could, if that answer is not an unqualified yes, I'm going to be talking to you up front about how much money we're paying, which is the worst conversation.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to open the floor to questions now. Depending on how loud your voice projects, I can come to you as well. In the back.
Just one nuance on calling your lawyer. If you have cyber insurance, which everyone obviously should have, you may have different lawyers according to your cyber insurance policy.
This is true. So usually, I will tell you that the second call is if you have a policy, that's the next one. Your general counsel may be the one initiating that communication while you're focused elsewhere, but yes, and if there are other counsel assigned, yeah, but all of your attorneys should be coordinating with each other. I mean, that's another mistake that is frequently made is, well, this is my general counsel, and then these are the lawyers assigned by my insurance company, and they don't speak. Big problem. Big problem. They should always be coordinating, even if your general counsel's not doing anything, just keeping an eye on the situation, because keep in mind your general counsel has a better understanding of the lay of the land outside of just this one issue, right? So, but yes, absolutely.
Carriers, and that's a great point, and we run into this all the time, is that carriers usually have or will have counsel that they've vetted out. So a lot of times you'll say, the counsel's there to represent the carrier. However, they've been vetted out. So I would also stress everybody, a great point is everyone probably does or should have cyber insurance as part of their overall risk mitigation tools that are out there, is that you can talk to your broker about looking to have the counsel that works with you right now to be vetted by that carrier that you have, so that the costs will be included as part of your policy, God forbid there's any kind of event or breach out there.
That's a great point. Thank you, Rob. Barbara, did you want to elaborate on your question from earlier?
Sure. Well, you already answered your funding. There is none. I didn't know if there was a group that has gotten together from corporate America, such as yourselves, to address the state, to see what they can do, because, just coming from districts on our own, there's no voice. BOCES does try, but what can we do to be smarter about getting these fundings, or at least remove our funds out of the 2% tax cap for this type of initiative? Have you heard any groups doing any of that? No. Okay. Very happy to hear, Superintendent, that you recognize that it's everyone's responsibilities, not just IT. So thank you very much, from the part-time person that only comes in once a year and opens an old email and clicks. That's a real issue. So my question is, the fellow from Gercio, do you have these meetings at this message at superintendent meetings? Meaning, when the superintendents get together, have you done presentations regarding what you're talking about today?
I'm not gonna, let me say this, I don't wanna speak for what other people may or may not say within my firm, but my understanding is yes, this is always, anytime this topic comes up, this is what needs to be talked about and what is talked about. Now, some of that may change based on what the particulars are of the people in the room, but yeah, the message is always the same, which is,
Can you speak a little bit louder?
sure, this is always a top-down and bottom-up issue. Everyone has to be involved, and it's something we've talked about, I know not just at my firm, but other firms. Talk about this with the districts that they represent as frequently as the issue comes up, and it's been something that law firms have been proactive about talking to their clients about, because this is not something that you want to just, well, let's put this back here. It's not a back burner item, this is a front burner item all the time.
But at the superintendent's meetings, do you guys talk about it? Because the tech director's meeting, we talk about it all the time. So it's, you're singing to the choir there.
Yeah, so up in Albany, we have a legislative group and an advocacy around cybersecurity and support. This is another unfunded mandate, as we call in our system. But what's interesting, and I think it's the embarrassment around districts when there is a cyber attack, that there's not an openness. My very first question is always to my tech director, what happened there? Are we vulnerable? Could you find out more information? And I have to tell you, depending on the district, that information is hard to get. The scariest meeting I was in was with a BOCES tech who worked in several districts and said, I knew that was coming because I was in that district, saw something, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they didn't listen to the part-time person that was coming in, doing some work, and realizing that they were as vulnerable as they were. But I have to tell you, I really think we have to get past that. It's an embarrassment and get more with what Joe's been saying. It's not who, it's when. I'm going to misquote you every single time on that one. Everyone but Plainview will bet me.
It's not if, it's when.
It's not if,
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
when, and we have to actually create those opportunities, and not just among tech directives.
No, right.
NISBA should be talking about this, NISCUS, that's the New York State Council of Superintendents, and actually, NATCO and the Suffolk County counterpart, which is the Curriculum and Instruction Assistant Superintendents. They're probably the biggest open source because they bring in so many outside vendors for their different areas of discipline, you know? This tool for that tool for this one, so really it should be a comprehensive conversation going on.
And getting back to your question, Barbara, about the education, I know you asked Matt, many of the panel members here, I think we first met in Albany at the first annual RIC 1 conference, where several of our panel members and myself were there to help educate attendees in Albany. So there's a lot of education, but you do need to reach out for it, because it's very difficult for anyone sitting on this panel to get to you, as it should be. But you know, if you're interested in the information, if you're interested in the entire panel coming to meet with your board or your district, that can be easily arranged, and the education is there. Joe, question in the back?
So this first item is not meant to scare you. Back in 2019, JP Morgan Chase's head, Jamie Dimon, reported they spent $500 million plus and 3,000 employees solely on cybersecurity. That year, they were attacked successfully. So we as a district on Long Island aren't going to spend that much money. There's a movement out there because districts, and one recent one is with Dropbox. They were successfully had a small attack. Everything was up to date. It was a 0-day issue. They couldn't have prevented it. It was something that was done. So how can a school district or a company be responsible for a product that the vendor had an issue with that they didn't even know? So we're talking about our school district with 3 and 4 and 5 people protecting everything. We need the state to help us and provide funding and to vet these companies. Instead of, like you said, the 47 school districts individually vetting the same company we're all using. Why are we doing that? That is a waste of resources. We need to work together as a team to help each other, because other than that, it's a losing battle, period.
And
End
it's
story.
not a one-time vetting. You
It's
understand?
every year.
We're about to take on a company right now, and I know other districts use this company, but I'm wondering, they were vetted several years ago by BOCES. Does BOCES go back now and vet them again? Have you maintained that level of security?
And we pay 10 to 15% for them to do that.
Correct.
It's like that kind of.
So we call that the VIG. However, it is an expense-driven aid that you know we get it on the back end next year.
So one of the things we talk about, like I've done vendor management probably for about 15, 20 years now, and I think one of the things we always try to do whenever we go to school districts, we say every year, every vendor you have to make sure that you re-vet them, you have to re-risk rank them, because everyone's going to be different, and I know you say how you're going to do it, how you have time to do that. Oh yeah, exactly, sorry, yes. Yes, right. So this should be done every year on every vendor, and every vendor should have, if they're an online vendor, they have a cloud vendor, they should have a SOC 2 report, at least have an audit firm come and do them. For those who say, oh, I'm not gonna do it, you know what? I get sometimes they're a sole source vendor, there's nothing else to do, but we have to get tough with those vendors. I mean, seriously, if they're not meeting their SLAs, then you take the money from them. Don't pay them, they're not meeting their SLAs, they're not meeting their contract requirements. I've done that with bigger companies too, and I know it's easier said than done, but
Then they
it's
send a 100-page report with their flaws on page 74,
Right.
and we have 300 companies we deal with.
Right.
And then the attorney says, well, you should have. Are you kidding me?
I go with this.
Kidding me?
Yeah.
That's the truth. That's why we pay the BOCES to do this.
Right.
That's their job.
But again, just to applaud my colleague on his observation and to emphasize that, Connecticut doesn't rank. It's not like you have to go across the world to see if anyone's figured this out. They centrally vet all software.
Yeah.
I really wish we could, as a collaborative, send that message to all New York.
Let's do that. Collaborative.
Let me explain something about that though. Connecticut doesn't vet them. They apply, they register on the site.
Right.
And then by registering, they're saying we're compliant.
So we could be a little bit better than Connecticut. So I
Exactly.
think we should.
So that's number
Very
one.
good.
Connecticut's not vetting. Second, I work for RICS and BOCES. One of the biggest concerns all the RICS have is vendor management, because honestly, no one, as educational agencies, we're not cybersecurity auditors. We don't have the training or the power to vet these vendors. We wish we did. So the big question for us right now, and it's a big part of the RIC initiatives for the RIC tech plans this year, is how do we manage these vendors? What are we allowed to vet them on? How can we even audit them? Right now, because of the way Ed Law 2D is structured, all they have to do is sign a piece of paper. Now, that is a legal document that they're committing to, but there's no guarantee, such as we've seen with some of the vendors like Illuminate, that they're actually adhering to it. So the RICS really do want guidance as to what we're allowed to do, what we're allowed to ask for, what we're not allowed to ask for, because we really don't know where to start. Because we're not an auditing agency. We are in the business of education, like you said, that's our business. So how can we do that other than making them adhere to it legally right now?
David, you mentioned you are AAA NAID certified. What does that actually mean, and what are you held to each year? Are you recertified? How does that work?
Yeah, so NAID is the National Association of Information Destruction, and they're a certifying body. The initial certification was rigorous. It took us months and months, and as a small company, trying to do business, we had to put a lot of effort into it, but it's worthwhile. Because honestly, we do it the right way, and we want everybody in the industry to also do it the right way. One thing we like to joke about is we have to take an exam on how to properly handle data. And I took the exam, I got a few wrong, and it was a little embarrassing. But we look back, and our requirements inside of Pupfish were greater than even what NAID required, and that's why we got the questions wrong. So I felt a little better about it. But we're constantly under the eye of NAID. NAID can pop in at any time to look at our facility to make sure we're doing what we say we're doing. They can audit our procedures, like they could be popping in there right now for all I know. They will follow trucks and vans and people out on pickups to make sure that they're properly handling the devices in a secure way. And if you're not, you can fail. You can become decertified. So it's a very rigorous and ongoing process. When we got certified, I know the auditor planned on hitting the other 7 companies that are NAID certified in paper shredding and other areas to do various audits on them. So finding a good organization that certifies companies and relying on their certification would be a good first step because you know that it's being done the right way then.
Thank you, David. Joe, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, Laura, I totally get the frustration on this. And again, doing vendor management for so many years, I think we need to change the mindset is that you're in control, you're paying the bills, right? The vendors seem to think like, oh, you'll still pay the bills no matter what. No, for every one vendor, even if there's there's got to be more than one. There is always more than one vendor that does what they do that actually has security controls in place or should have security controls in place. With New York State Ed Law 2D in Part 121, they have to now have some kind of security in place to protect the data. And if they're not going to do it, then again, they're not meeting the service level agreement. They either not get paid or you go out and find another vendor. I mean, we have to have that mindset where they are not in control of what the education industry does.
And we do, but it's so much easier. You can't let's say your student management system isn't adhering to the requirements. You can't just switch your student management system. That implementation takes years. It's very difficult for school districts to pivot that quickly, depending on what the product is. And the other issue they have is IEPs. Okay, if you have a mandated software program on IEP and they're a very small company, they don't even have a legal department, they can't even sign your agreement, do you not provide that support to the child? It's so much more complex for educational agencies than just money or switching. So that's why there's so much frustration, because there's so many other regulations that they're adhering to, and making a big swing by adopting a whole new product when you're embedded in something, it's not an easy decision.
No, I agree. And what you want to do is you want to reduce the amount of companies that don't have the security controls in place. So you're monitoring every single one,
Yeah.
right? I think that's the point here. So you're not going to ever get 100%. But at least if you instead of having to monitor 25%, you're only monitoring 5%, I think that's a win. If you want me to ever come and help you, don't worry. I have
Thanks,
no
Joe.
fear of these vendors.
Joe, did you have something to add to that?
I second that. It's almost impossible. It takes years long to switch some of our main product, like our systems, something like that.
Yeah.
Second, I think something I've been pushing with the state is to have a master list of things they've known to breach. Instead of getting that email, Illuminate came to me on a Friday at 6 p.m. Okay? Which one the state tends to send emails to about things, but we'll talk about that later. All the time, on a holiday weekend.
There's a difference, and is this hard tug of war between what the law says and what you have to do to make your business run. Okay, and here we're talking about a school district, and the practical effect of what's happening, right? Because on one side, I'm dealing with a couple of employees that say, I can't work unless I do this. Now, they're wrong, but getting them to understand that they're wrong is a really hard part of this, right? And making sure I'm complying. It's a continuum. It's not a hard yes or no. This is a continuum. What you need to do is get yourself into a position where you are in a position to say, I'm doing what I can. I can't account for this one end user who just won't listen. And they just won't do what I'm telling them to do. And here's all the times I told them not to do this, and they did it anyway. From my perspective right now, I go back to I'm in litigation, and I hand off to whoever's deciding, well, we told this end user once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, don't do this. We did it in writing. We counseled this person. We disciplined this person. We did all these things, and they still did it.
Can that person be held accountable in the school district?
Just like you would, with the security of a building. You would see a teacher maybe chop a door open once. You have to counsel them. You have to go for some disciplinary practices. So if you're constantly telling the same person, you left the Wi-Fi, you did your work at home. We see that you downloaded your roster onto your home computer. They have to be written up. And you have to keep communicating to folks that these were the steps you have taken, because when it does happen, at least the community has been regularly updated on what you've done to maintain, which includes holding folks accountable for the processes and procedures you've put in place to keep the district's data safe.
There's a legal part of that, and then there's the other piece that Dr. Amir just said, right? There's the, how do I communicate this message out to my community, right? I don't want to be the one that didn't bother to say anything to this employee, just won't listen. No, we did X, Y, and Z. And now it may be time for discipline. I think as we go over the next few years, you're going to start seeing. We're going to go through the disciplinary charge process, which I like because that creates work for me, right? Right, the business part of me goes, hey, more work, right? But the reality is, it is invariably, whenever I have cases where the employer didn't bother to do anything, they didn't counsel, they didn't write up, they didn't do anything, that's where I struggle. Those are always the cases I find difficult, because I can't back up what I'm saying. This person's a risk. But you know what I can do now is, if we do have that record, I can walk in and say, we're in a disciplinary hearing, and I say, this person's gotta go. This person is a security risk.
Security risk,
right? Hey, if a hearing officer wants to tell me, well, I'm gonna keep them there. Okay, but from the back end, right, the public perception part of that, I did everything I could. I put this person into a hearing, tried to get rid of them. This is somebody else telling me now. But now I'm gonna do all sorts of things to make this difficult.
Thank you.
To make sure. So.
Thank you, Matt. Jay?
So I had a question in regard to end users and all the different things that we kind of talk about. We're always talking about paid software. What about the free software? I click all the way through, with COVID freebies, as we used to call it,
Nothing's free.
That was problematic. We had so many teachers that were working from home from March to June that downloaded all of that. So the first thing, one of our tasks for our new tech director was to find out everything that was being used, all the free sites, and it was exorbitant. And then we were fair. We vetted those products and said how much is needed for us to take on and purchase and go through the Ed Law 2D work that we do to bring it on as an acceptable vendor. But it was exorbitant, the amount of stuff people were using.
And then just going back to what Joe was saying, if it was possible to get those free vendors on that, vetted list, then maybe in the future they can charge for their services, and maybe it'll actually help them. So, having that conversation with the vendors and saying, we're trying to help you get into the BOCES, get into the RICS, get into whatever it is, but you have to get through that process first, I think is a really good step.
The Erie One BOCES has contract consortiums, which are the closest thing we have to a state list. They do have a free RFP for free software products, and there are several that participate in that free RFP, and your BOCES can provide an opt-in agreement if you are using those free products in your districts. But that's as close as it gets. One thing, we love Lynette Attai from Playwell LLC, and she works with student data privacy, and she's written a few books, so we just dig her. She always says, free software, if you can't find a person, there's no one to talk to, there's no one you can ask a question of, then you shouldn't use it.
Right.
At the same time, EdLaw 2D, and the current CPO for New York State Ed recognizes this, it shouldn't impede instruction. I used to always be a no person. No, you can't use it. No, you can't use it. But it shouldn't impede instruction. If it's necessary to provide instruction, if it's enhancing the curriculum, if it's designated on an IEP, you don't have to say no immediately. You want to be careful, you want to assess risk, but free software products, if there's something else you have that does the same thing, don't use it. If there's no one to talk to, don't use it.
How is that information communicated to the end user? So, we're doing our own
We're doing our own, everybody, our tech directors, we do our own software audits to a certain extent, but now the heat's really on, right? To really drill down to this, you're using just this one extension, why? So we're going down there. How do we get, other than just putting a message out to the staff, you can't just use whatever you want anymore, is there another way that you're communicating with the staff? How are you communicating with your internal staff to say, sorry, all bets are off, you cannot download whatever you want whenever you want at home, you cannot download the roster onto your home computer at 10 o'clock at night when you're trying to figure something out? How is that message, in a positive way, getting out there?
I'm gonna pass you over to our new guy.
So,
Yeah, you have to slow it down though. The first thing, very similar to school safety, you're never going to stop a school shooter who's absolutely adamant in getting in.
Right.
But what you wanna do is slow it down. So Alex, how do we slow it down?
he's not that new.
What else can you do anyway?
I'm doing a roadshow. I'm visiting every single building, meeting with all faculty, and for those that are not in those meetings, I, during our superintendent's conference day, held a webinar for all of our clerical staff, and we're going to get to everybody, and I'm putting them on notice that while maybe we haven't cranked down on everything yet, it's coming, and we're going to start collecting that information, and if you don't add something that, if your product doesn't meet our needs, we'll try to find an alternative, but if it doesn't work, we have to shut it down. We've already put in Azure and Google approvals. So if somebody tries to click on, you can sign in using this app, it comes to me and I get a notice and I'll look at it. I'll send them an email back and say, no, you can't do it this way, you gotta do it this way.
But it's actually that personal touch of going around, and just one brag on it. When Alex came and we started doing phishing campaigns, at the end of the year last year, we had 12% of our faculty fall for it, which had me up every single night throughout the summer, because he did it like the second to last day of school, and I'm like, where are those 143 people? They cannot come back to work in September. He wouldn't give me the list, because he knew I was serious. But he just did one the other day, we were less than 1%, but the beautiful thing was, it was our aides, and they're the most transient population in our staff. So there were no teachers, students, or admin that fell for it. It was mostly aides, and less than 1%, so it's really the daily diligence.
Just a quick question for Matthew. Quick question for Matthew or anyone else who has an opinion on this. You talk about mitigation of risk, thinking from your perspective. I'm from a very small East End district. We've only had a tech director or a tech person at all for 2 years now. And that's a lot of districts, out on the East End. We think we're doing everything we need to be doing, but in order to, you said you want to be able to say we've done everything we can do. So at that point, where does a small district like that begin? We rely on outside consultants constantly. I have an audit background myself. Where do we begin? My inclination is with an internal audit. But then who are the best people to seek for that? Is it Cerini? Is it Stetson? Is it LI Tech? Any thoughts on that? Maybe Mary, any thoughts on that from you?
Well, I would recommend any of our panelists. They're all excellent. I think the first thing understanding that you have to go outside because you're looking for people who work with school districts. I've seen people looking for vendors who don't work with schools. I'm like, why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense to me. So yes, I would go to any of these panelists, depending on what you're looking for. But yeah, that's your first thing. I would talk to your lawyers. Sometimes some of your lawyers, and obviously my firm doesn't represent every school district in this room, so speak with your attorneys. They may have people with whom they work. That is an important part of that. And then, but if they don't, maybe they have someone else who does, right? I deal with lawyers at other firms all the time. We're always sharing that sort of information. If there's a vendor that I really like, I'm absolutely talking with other attorneys that I work with at the other firms. The school law game is smaller. There's only a handful of firms. We all know each other. We all talk to each other. Particularly in this area, we're always talking with each other about things that we've seen, threats that we've seen, vendors we like, people we like to work with because they're really good. I like to work with people. A guy can be completely nice to me and treat me like gold and be terrible at his job, and I'm never going to send him business. I only care about people who are good at what they do. And so, if you're going to get a referral from me, it's only going to be somebody who's really good at what they do.
Yeah, I would recommend have a conversation with any one of us and identify what area you really want to address. If you need auditors. If you feel like you want a risk assessment, go for risk assessment. If you want an IT, any one of us can really give you that information. Just have the conversation. It's free to have the conversation with us. And one-on-ones and discuss really what.
And if we're not the right, we'll refer you over to who should know.
Exactly.
And one of the reasons we brought this particular panel together is because they collaborate so well and so closely with one another. They are in touch day to day. This isn't a panel who's sitting today and we'll see each other a few months from now. The conversation is ongoing and the dialogue continues.
I would also say that, as we like to say around the Takashusi household, cheap is good, free is better. And in the case of what you have here is if you have a cyber policy, for instance, the carriers provide you with some level of free services, pen testing, some free basic services that you're paying for, you probably don't even know as part of that policy. So one of the first steps is, yes, an initial pen test is really not going to do too much, but it will identify some really drastic issues you may have to then talk to somebody after that. The second piece that I would say that really helps is, and a couple times it came up about school security is such a huge issue. And all of you have plans in place on how to mitigate that. The steps to take if there is an active shooter. Just like when I was little, I remember the fire drills. Everyone knew where to go when there was a fire alarm. We talk a lot about a cyber incident response plan. If you do not have one, it's easy enough to create. And that helps because the last thing you want to do is when something does happen, is to think about who needs to talk to the media. What steps do I need to take? Because you want to make sure that you have a limited amount of interruption. So that's another step to maybe take as a smaller school district, is just make sure you have some sort of cyber incident response plan, because it can then identify some of those areas of risk that you can then look to have outside help and ask questions about.
Thanks, Rob. And Sherry?
I just want to add also, there's some other language that you can introduce to people that might help them to advocate for their cause, especially if you're a small district. So, we talk about passwords. Passwords have been around for a long time, okay? It should really be passphrases. It should be a longer multi-composite, you know, it could be a sentence. That's what I tell people, like anything you really care about, you know, I'm like, you know, it's 16 characters long, at least for me. And people are like, how do you remember that? I'm like, it's a phrase. Think of it as a passphrase. Don't say passwords anymore. Say passphrase, something that you're really gonna remember, and make it unique. Do not share or do not have the same, these are like basic concepts that you have. Disaster recovery, that was the big buzzword way, way back. Then it became disaster preparedness. You know what, it's really business continuity, and that means it's not just IT. That means it involves everybody, it involves a team. And those are the kinds of conversations you wanna have especially if you're a small place, because you're going to be wearing multiple hats. And how do you do that? And how do you do that on a limited budget? You still have an obligation to protect all that data. So it's really coming in and having somebody, you know, from an audit side, we're coming in to assess those risks, document those risks, and tell you where some of those other holes are. That will then tell you where else you should be going and advocating.
Thanks, Sherry. Brian?
Yes. So just real quick to touch on what Rob said, incident response plans can be very complicated. If anybody has started them, they you know, depending on your organization, there are a lot of components to take into play when you're doing them. However, my recommendation is to start where you are and get the plan, even in its basic infancy stages, in place. Even if it's just a contact tree, once you start that process, it helps to continue to build it. If you say every quarter you're going to review it, or every year you're going to review it, the plan's going to continue to evolve. And it gives you that place to start and to continue. Because otherwise, I see too many organizations jumping into it and trying to get everything done in one shot, and it's not the right way to do it, especially when you have limited resources, which school districts do. I also see that when you have somebody that's dedicated to cybersecurity in your organization and your district, that really helps to push the narrative down the road. That person has that capability and that desire to continue those processes to move forward, and it's really important. And in successful organizations, that person is the key to the environment succeeding in cybersecurity. I just have one question for you. When it comes to just one, when it comes to due care and due diligence in a legal aspect, if it goes to court or whatever that might be, how or where should a district know or understand where they are to determine that they've done enough due care or due diligence that could be applicable in some sort of legal?
So, I mean, I think some of what you've heard here is this concept of education, right? There's a lot of, and you just said it, like small doses, right? Small bits, one step at a time. So doing what you can. Everyone, anytime you're dealing with an issue relating to cybersecurity or technology, and I'm in court, right? They understand that this is not, it's not simple. So I need to show that, yeah, they understand, one, problem exists, training, right? Simple things like training, I don't have any. Well, you fail, I mean, right? You're done. I also represent a number of private sector employees, right? They don't seem to get that they have to do a yearly sexual harassment training. No matter how many times I'll tell them, and they don't do it. I said, well, great. As soon as you get sued, just be ready for the check. We'll talk about how big the check's going to be, right? Or I'm going to tell your insurance company exactly how big the check's going to need to be, and then they're going to drop you. But due diligence is a continuum too. What is the issue? What did you do to try to prevent it? So what steps did you take? Simple things like education and training. Did you do those things? Great. Okay, now you've at least step one is done. Now the next step. You also have to think about what the problem is, right? What actually happened? It is a unforeseen ransomware attack that is brand new. Well, that's going to be different than, hey, somebody clicked on a phishing scam that, you know, they got the email from the prince in some country that no one's ever heard of, and they clicked on it. right? There's a difference in those two things. So the more obvious problem, well, what did you do to educate people about the phishing scams? What did you do to make it harder for them to click on those things? So it's hard, there's no bright line answer, but it's the basics to do the basics. If you didn't do the basics, you're done. If you've done the basics, which to me is education, training, you have policies, you have procedures. Did you at least do those, or were you on the road to doing those? What are your outside consultants? That's what they're going to look at. Who do you have managing this? Oh, I have some guy that I employ that comes in 3 hours a week, and he's in charge of the entire technology for 2,000 people.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
So just real quick, just one more thing
Sure.
to add to that conversation. So if a district goes through, does the risk assessment based upon PD law, they've identified 15 risks. 4 of them are exploitable risks, and they've developed a 5-year cybersecurity plan to remediate those, because a lot of those require cultural changes, they require a lot of different things that need to happen for that to go in place. If one of those exploitation models were exploited and you were legally, involved with the district for some, case or something there, is the recognition of it? I know it's not enough, but can that be used to?
Yes, the fact that you did a risk assessment, you identified this as a problem, you identified a solution or plan, and started down the road of the plan, and you got caught somewhere in the midst of doing that, yeah, that's really good. That's the kind of argument I want to be able to go in with. Because if you got exploited, chances are there was something that was out there. So you want to be able to say, I'm doing what I was supposed to do.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to take an opportunity and thank you for this panel. It was incredible. I think these conversations need to be happening more often. Would you be able to share out there information? I was taking notes about everybody.
We will. We're going to, right. So that's why it's so important, ladies and gentlemen, if you have not registered at the registration table, please leave your contact information and register so that we can send you the bios and the contact information for all of our panelists today. Any other questions and answers? If not, I'm going to ask the panelists to take 1 moment each for a quick takeaway.
Okay, questions. So I just have 2 quick things. Number 1, I don't know if it was clear, but so I'm an IT and cybersecurity guy. You are eventually going to get breached. It's going to happen, but that doesn't mean that you can't minimize the impact. So by compartmentalizing different systems, you don't have what happened in Suffolk County where they got everything.
And that's the point of what our panelists are bringing to you today. There are ways to minimize that risk.
And I just advocate for the IT guy because I've been at both sides of it. A lot of times, and I deal with the private sector a lot, where people just assume the IT guy and cybersecurity guy is doing all the work and implementing the system to protect the business or the school district. A lot of that has to be driven by policy, so it kind of all starts there with your risk assessment, knowing where your data is, what's, where that is, to then define what policies you need to adhere to define what security systems need to go into place to protect it.
Exactly, and I don't want to take away from Joe's final point because I bet that was going to be it. So let's, Sherry, can you begin? What is one key takeaway that you hope everybody leaves with today?
Communication amongst a lot of different people, that it takes a village, to raise a child. It takes a number of different people in a school district to really address cybersecurity. It's not just the IT department. And working with auditors, at least from an internal audit, I can tell you, we help to advocate.
Joe?
I'm going to give 3 very quick, because then I'm on just for a short time. Number 1, any of us come in as business partners and partners with everybody here. We don't come in to embarrass you or to do anything. So if you needed our help, it's totally to help you, 100% to help. We're on your side. Number 2, thank your IT people for their short staff and they're doing the best they can, but also ask them how you can help if you are not in IT. All right, it's your responsibility as well to help them out. And 3 points. You can either be inactive and do nothing and hope for the best, which is not the best thing to do. You could be reactive, but then it's too late. Or you could be proactive and really take this bull by the horns and really do your best to protect the district from protect the data and information from the district.
Thanks, Jim. Anthony, one key takeaway?
Pretty much everything he just said. We're the same thing, is that you gotta, proactive planning is key, all right? Find your champions within your organizations as far as who can take this ball and run with it. IT people, I know what it's like, I'm one of them. But definitely work with them and help them with have open communications and start the conversation. That's the hardest part.
David?
So I would say that recycling is not data destruction. Make sure that the person or the company that's handling your data destruction is certified, doing it the right way, providing you the right reports and certifications so that you can protect yourself in the event that there ever is a breach.
And student data.
I would say ask questions. You have a lot of resources that are available to you among your counterparts as well as among some folks like ourselves. Ask questions because bad actors out there are constantly refining their opportunities to exploit vulnerabilities. You want to do the same proactively, asking questions and refining what the things that you do have in place and that you do control, that you're constantly evolving those as well.
I would say it's everybody's job in the school community to take care of the data that we have. And if you really liken it to what you've done for school security, down to the teacher level. The biggest tragedy about Uvalde was a teacher left a door open. And I have to tell you, that one instance allowed all of us to go at the teacher level with school security, and I really believe when you show how vulnerable every user is to open up the key to the district's data, it can't all be top down. I guess that's it. It just can't all be top down.
Thank you. Matt?
I would just say, educate yourselves. That's the biggest way to help you in this regard. This is an issue with just so many nuances. You need to understand them, and you need to educate yourselves and those around you so that you can better attack the problem, be proactive about it, but work both in reality and in the non-reality that is the law. And that's education to a bunch of educators, right? But that's what you need to do, is make sure that you have to understand it. You can't attack a problem if you don't understand what the problem is. So educate yourself about what the problem is and how to go about creating a solution for yourself.
Thank you, Matt. Sherry Diamond is partner at Cerini and Associates. Joseph Horowitz is the Director of Compliance and Audit with Stetson Cyber Group. Anthony Bonospinas, the CEO of Long Island Tech Advisors. David Faverio is President of Pupfish Sustainability Solutions. Rob Tokarczewski is Vice President at USI Insurance. Dr. Mary O'Meara is Superintendent, Plainview, Old Bethpage. And Matthew Maynard is Partner at Guercio & Guercio. Panelists, thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you for joining us. Our panelists will be here for you to answer questions before you leave if you want to grab them. And again, just leave your email address so that we can forward you their contact information as well. Thank you so much.